right, so good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another exciting broadcast with us here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. I know we've got some familiar faces in the crowd today, but if you are new to us, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. Now, everything we do goes to our YouTube channel, so if you want to check out this program in 3 weeks, 3 years, share it with your friends and family, you can do just that at the link below. Lots of opportunity to keep the learning going. And today, I am particularly excited because this is our penultimate broadcast in our epic Our Changing Planet series. We have been partnering with the amazing folks at Environment and Climate Change Canada all week long to feature incredible stories of their scientists and engineers and what they do in their jobs. So we've talked to Greg Mitchell about monarch butterflies, tracking them all over North American continent. We've talked to Zen and Chris about snow and ice and weather climate tracking in the Arctic, some of the most remote regions of the planet. But today we are doing something very different indeed. I'm so excited to welcome on Shirley Anne Smyth. She is the head of the Wastewater Science Unit of Environment and Climate Change Canada. And in her bio, she has a line that I never thought I'd see in one of our bios, that she loves sewage. So I'm excited to learn from her about just why that is, the amazing work that they do to keep our water healthy for all of us. And without further ado, I'm done talking. I'm going to turn you over to Shirley Anne. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jesse.
So I know you've got a lot to share with us today. So if you want to dive in and literally and figuratively, perhaps, and bring up that presentation, that would be spectacular. And while you're doing that, I'll just note again, if people want to check out the full Changing Planet list of broadcasts, they can do that there. But let's see what this is all about. I'm really excited about this today, Shirley Anne.
Thank you. I'm just getting my technology queued up here.
This is the fun. We have to wrestle with the technology half the time. Otherwise, it's yeah, there we are. You are good to go. This is beautiful.
I am good. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shirley Anne. And like Jesse said, I love sewage and I love water and I love talking about water. So thank you for joining me today. We are going to talk about who I am and why I love sewage. I'm going to talk a little bit about watersheds and water issues in Canada. I'm going to tell you how wastewater treatment works. And then I'm going to give you a couple of ideas of what you can do to help protect water in Canada. So to start with, I am from the largest freshwater island in the world, Manitoulin Island. You can see there on the map. I grew up on a farm there, so I've been surrounded by freshwater my whole life. So that might have influenced my favorite subject, which is water. Here I am. I told you I love sewage. Here I am standing in front of a sewage tank, or more correctly, a biosolids tank. And what I really love is wastewater treatment. I discovered it during a co-op work term when I was working at the lab in the Clarkson wastewater treatment plant in Mississauga, Ontario. And what I learned was that wastewater treatment turns this, which is raw sewage coming in from all of our houses, into this. Look at that. Look at that clean effluent, that clean treated water, and biosolids, which are a kind of people manure that we can use on land to recycle nutrients. So wastewater treatment protects our water. Now I'm going to talk about water on a big scale. I'm going to ask you, what is a watershed? A watershed is an area of land that drains or sheds water into a specific water body. Another word for it is a drainage basin. You can talk about little watersheds like your local lake or river, or you can talk about national watersheds. This is an example of the watershed between the Atlantic Ocean and the Arctic Ocean. It's about halfway between Sudbury and Timmins in Northern Ontario, and it's a height of land. And north of that height of land, all the water flows to the Arctic Ocean through Hudson's Bay. And south of that height of land, all the water flows down to the Great Lakes and out to the Atlantic Ocean. So that is a big, big watershed. Then here's an example of a smaller watershed. This is the Grand River watershed in Southern Ontario. And some of you may recognize some of these city names. We have Guelph, Waterloo, Kitchener, Cambridge, Brantford. So the Grand River watershed goes from Dundalk in the north down to Dunnville and Lake Erie in the south. Fun fact about the Grand River watershed, there are 30 wastewater treatment plants that discharge into this watershed. All those little red squares are wastewater treatment plants. Back to the national level, here is a map of all the drainage regions of Canada. So think about where you live. I'm told that there are folks on the line here from Ottawa. So that shows the Ottawa River Drainage Basin or watershed. And then we have the Great Lakes Drainage Basin here. And of course, those all end up in the Atlantic Ocean. And then I hear that we have some folks on the line from Wisconsin. So down on this side, also draining into the Great Lakes. And depending on where you are, your watershed could drain into the Missouri-Mississippi watershed. And folks from Alberta out here, we have the number 4, we have the Columbia River watershed down in the south. We have the North and South Saskatchewan River watershed over here. And then we have the Peace Athabasca watershed up here. And those, see how there's 3 different destinations in Alberta. So all of the blue ends up in Hudson Bay. All of the yellow ends up in the Arctic Ocean. And the pink and red ends up in the Pacific Ocean. Now, there are some people, this is something for you to think about and maybe talk about. Some people think that political boundaries should follow watershed boundaries. If you look really closely here, you can see the lines. There's, Saskatchewan, Alberta line. You can see the line between Alberta and BC. Part of it follows the watershed, but part of it doesn't. Over here in Ontario, the Ottawa River forms part of the boundary between Ontario and Quebec. But then we've got all these straight lines for our provinces and our international border here that don't follow any watersheds at all. So something to think about. Moving on, do you know about water issues where you live? So think about where you live and what you see around you in terms of water issues or what you hear people talking about. Here's an example. Some parts of Canada, Canada is a huge country, and some parts of Canada have lots of water, like the Great Lakes. But then out on the prairies, they don't have so much water. So they have to think differently about where the drinking water comes from, where their wastewater goes, and how they're going to manage that for people. Then, regardless of where you live, you can have a problem with too much water in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is a picture of flooding that happened in Ottawa in 2019. So that is most definitely way too much water in the wrong place. And then here, this is southern Alberta near Medicine Hat. And all of those circles are from huge irrigation equipment that irrigates the fields so the crops can grow. So that is moving water to where we need it. And you can see the difference in the color between where the fields are irrigated and where they're not. So those are things to think about in terms of water quantity. We also need to think about water quality, of course. And one of the big issues with water quality is nutrients. Nutrients are nitrogen and phosphorus and other things that plants need in order to grow and that organisms in general need. But if there's too many nutrients or too few nutrients in a place, that causes problems. There is what a water body looks like if it has too many nutrients in it. And this can even happen to big lakes like Lake Winnipeg and Lake Erie. They can still be badly damaged by too many nutrients in the wrong place. So how does that happen? What is that? What's going on there? That is called eutrophication. It happens when the nutrients run off the land and they into the water. So the plants in the water are happy because they grow and grow and grow. And then they die, the algae and the seaweed, I guess we call it. But when the plants die and they decompose, that decomposition process, it consumes all the oxygen in the water, and then there's none left for the fish, and the fish suffocate. So eutrophication is a really important problem, and managing nutrients carefully, making sure they stay on the fields where they're needed, is a really important thing to do. And wastewater treatment plants also discharge nutrients in the waste that they treat. And so that's one of the things that they do. And I'm giving away something I'm going to tell you in a couple of minutes. So this is one aspect of water quality, nutrients. Another aspect of water quality that I'm sure you've heard people talking about is chemicals in the water. And these are from all the products that we use in our homes. So look at these pictures here. You've got shampoo and moisturizer, you've got sunscreen, you've got the non-stick coatings on your cookware, you've got the pharmaceuticals that you take to help keep you healthy or recover from something. And then, I know this is an absolutely gross looking picture, but the idea is that even the dust in our homes contains chemicals. And when you dust and you wash your dust cloth in the sink, those chemicals end up in the wastewater. And so that's how chemicals from what we use can get into the environment. Another thing that is a problem with water quality is plastics. Again, I'm sure you've heard people talking about this. Microplastics, look at how small those are on the end of the finger. Those can easily be ingested by any kind of organism, including us. And macroplastics, look at all those water bottles there. They harm animals and they spoil natural places. So these are the kinds of water issues to think about: water quantity and water quality. Moving on, what does wastewater treatment do? This is what I get so excited about. What does wastewater treatment do? Well, first I want to remind you that we are part of the water cycle. The water evaporates from the lakes and rivers and it forms clouds and then it rains back down. And that's fine. That's the water cycle back and forth. But we are part of that because we take water out of the lakes and rivers. We treat it, we drink it, we excrete it, we treat it, and then we put it back into the lakes and rivers. So the water cycle absolutely includes us. So what does wastewater treatment do? The first purpose of wastewater treatment was to get the waste away from people. In the old days, people would literally take their chamber pots and dump them out the window onto the street. And so there would be sewage flowing in the street, like in old days, hundreds of years ago. And people would get sick. And they didn't realize that that wastewater had pathogens in it, bacteria that can make you very, very sick. So once people figured that out, they realized that they needed to collect that wastewater and get it away from people so that people would not get sick from those waterborne diseases. And then we realized that that wastewater that we had gotten away from the people was causing a problem in the environment too. So we had to think about how to treat it, not just move it, but how to treat it. So wastewater treatment deals with the oxygen demand that's in the water. And what that means is the organic material that we all excrete, and you can think about it, that demands oxygen, that consumes oxygen in the receiving environment. And so we need to not discharge that material. Suspended solids can coat habitat in the receiving environment, and that isn't good for the fish and the frogs and all the other critters that live there. And then I already talked about pathogens. Those are the kinds of bacteria that can make you very sick. And I already talked about nutrients. So these are all the things that wastewater treatment treats. Now, here's a couple of examples of what wastewater treatment looks like. This is treatment in a very small town. This is called a lagoon, and it's basically a pond in a farmer's field. And the town gathers the wastewater, pumps it into the pond, and it sits there for weeks or months. And the sun shines down on it and the ultraviolet light kills things and the wind blows over it and gives a bit of aeration and the little bacteria grow and they munch up all the organic matter and it settles to the bottom. And then the operators come along and they test the water to make sure that it meets our criteria for discharge, and then they discharge it out to the environment. So you'll see these kinds of little treatment plants or treatment systems all over Canada. This is the most common way that wastewater treatment is done in Canada because we have many, many more small towns than we have big towns. On the subject of big towns, this is the Duffin Creek wastewater treatment plant in Pickering, Ontario. It's the 7th largest treatment plant in Canada, and it treats wastewater from Aurora, Kleinburg, Markham, Newmarket, Richmond Hill, Thornhill, Vaughan, and Pickering. And in this plant, we help the bacteria by providing them with tanks and extra aeration and extra time so that they can treat the wastewater, munch up all the stuff, and then we settle them out of the wastewater. Look at how nice and blue these clarifiers are at the end here. That is the cleaned effluent ready to be discharged to Lake Ontario. So I've given you a whirlwind tour of watersheds, water quality, water quantity, and what wastewater treatment does. Now, what can you do? What can you do to contribute to help water quality and in Canada? Well, the first thing you can do is be aware. Think about what you flush. I strongly, strongly recommend that you look up the Own Your Throne video series from the city of Hamilton in Ontario. You will meet Sir Peter, the Duchess of Swirl, and Richard the Turd, and they will tell you about the things that you should and should not flush down your toilet. I would have liked to have put the link to the video in my presentation here, but I wasn't confident that it would work. The other thing that you can do is think about what you use in your home. Here's our pictures again of, pharmaceuticals and personal care products that you use in your home. What do you use? How much do you use? Cleaning products. How many different kinds do you use? Do you really need them all? And in terms of pharmaceuticals, if you have leftover ones, do not flush them down the toilet. Take them back to the pharmacy because they will dispose of them properly. So think about what you use and what you flush. The other thing to do is talk about water. Ask questions. Do you know where your drinking water comes from? Do you know where your local wastewater treatment plant is? You can ask for tours of both of those. And it's I'm biased, obviously, but I think it's very, very interesting. And when was the last time that you visited your local lake or river? What's going on there? Are there walking paths? Is there a beach? Go and enjoy the water and talk about it. And the other thing that you can always do is learn more. As you think about, the future and what your favorite subjects are, you can learn more about water in different kinds of science, in engineering, in business, in social science. There's lots of things that you can do if this interests you. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this. And especially for the folks listening in Ontario, if you want to tell me your town or city, I might be able to tell you about your drinking water or your wastewater.
Ooh, all right. Well, thank you so much, Shirley Anne, for that whirlwind tour. We covered a lot of ground there. Holy. We actually will. We'll start with Ontario classroom and where they're coming from. We've got Guelph and Ottawa today. Can you tell us a little bit about where the water comes from in those two places? Quite far apart from each other, but anything you can share?
Sure. Yes. Well, Kitchener is in the Grand River watershed. So that was one of the pictures that I showed you. The city of Kitchener gets most of its water from wells, so from groundwater sources, but it does get some of its drinking water from the Grand River. And then the city of Kitchener has a wastewater treatment plant at the south end of the city. It's called the Dune Treatment Plant, and it treats the wastewater very well. I've been there many times, and it discharges it back into the Grand River. In Ottawa, I don't know as much about Ottawa. I've only been there once or twice to look at treatment systems. The drinking water comes from upstream in the Ottawa River, and then the wastewater treatment plant is the R.O. Picard Environmental Center, which again is at the downstream end of the city, and it treats the wastewater and pours it back into the river. And that's another thing to think about when you're thinking about watersheds, is that everybody's downstream is somebody else's upstream.
Yeah.
So back to you, Jesse.
Thank you very much. What a great answer. Quick question about your outfit. Are you always wearing gear like that when you're out and about? Are you deep swallow? Do you have to wear that in your job all the time? I know you're doing it for the program today with us live, but I'm curious, and our audience is too.
For the big wastewater treatment plants, yes, they want us to wear the hard hat. They want us to wear the high visibility vest. They want us to wear steel-toed shoes. Sometimes, depending on which building we're going into, they want us to wear ear protection because there's loud equipment in there. And we need to wear eye protection because, of course, you do not want to get splashed with wastewater as you go along.
Very cool. Thank you for that. During the pandemic, we heard a lot about testing for COVID in the wastewater. Do we still test for that? Do we test for other viruses? Is there anything that we can use wastewater for to understand more about health in communities? Has that been sort of followed up on after our experience the last few years?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Cool.
Yes, when the pandemic started and we started hearing about using wastewater to get advance warning of COVID, just to back up a little bit, what happens is when you get COVID or anything else and you get sick, you have the bug in you and you start excreting bug bits, for lack of a better word, in your urine and your feces before you actually start showing symptoms.
Interesting.
So by the time you feel sick and you go to the doctor, you've already been excreting leftovers of the virus for a few days. So going to the doctor is kind of too late from a public health point of view, whereas the wastewater surveillance lets people know right away, ooh, there's sick people in this community. They're excreting bits of the virus. And our public health colleagues actually didn't have any experience with how to sample wastewater. And so they called us. They called my team, and we were heavily involved in the first few months of the pandemic as the public health people were learning how to sample wastewater.
Fascinating. And by the way, in 1,500 broadcasts I've hosted, excreting bug bits has never been said. So thank you for giving me new bingo category for exploring by the seat of your pants. Speaking of things that we might not necessarily want in our water, you talked a little bit about microplastics, and we do a huge plastic series every September. Are we drinking microplastics in our tap water? How might we avoid microplastics? Anything you can share with us about that would be lovely.
That's a really good question, and we don't have a lot of answers yet. Depending on your drinking water treatment process, there might be some microplastics in your drinking water. And we definitely have studies that show microplastics in feces. So I guess that's your short answer. Yes, they are getting into us.
Yep. Interesting. This is something that we've had a lot of people on talking about fish in the past and sort of sampling the Great Lakes, sampling river systems around Ontario and beyond. And it's quite amazing how ubiquitous plastic is pretty much everywhere. It is our great contribution. I've heard it in a comedy skit before that, like, you know, man evolved to create plastic. And then when we're gone, that will be our longest lasting contribution to the world.
Not really something to be proud of.
No, not necessarily. On a happier note, nature solutions. You highlighted some of these wastewater treatment plants that are sort of outdoors, they're sitting in the sun. Are there ways that we can use marshes, riverbed, anything that exists in nature already to clean our water in a more efficient or effective way? And are we seeing this either in Canada or around the world?
We actually already use nature to clean our wastewater. Think about me, bear with me for a minute. If you took the contents of your toilet and you put an aeration stone in it, like from your fish tank, and you provided that with oxygen, okay, those contents of your toilet have bacteria in them. And the things that you're excreting are also food for the bacteria. And what was discovered in England about 100 years ago was that if you aerated that mess, what you got was bacterial activity that activated the sludge and chomped up all the stuff in the water. And then if you stopped aerating, all that bacteria or activated sludge would settle to the bottom, and you would end up with clean effluent like that picture I showed that looks, you know, perfectly clean and clear. So what we've done over the years is we've done studies to understand the bacteria better and how we can help them more. So like I said, we build them tanks to live in, and we provide them with the right amount of air for them to do their job. So we are helping Mother Nature do the job that she already knows how to do.
Yeah. How interesting is that? Thank you for the very detailed answer. I love that question, guys. All right. What happens if you have a place like that? And we've talked about this on YouTube a little bit. and things go wrong. It floods. There's a huge rainstorm and it floods those pools. It floods everything we're trying to contain the sewage in. Is there a way to mitigate that? Or do we design it to prevent things like that from happening to begin with? Anything you can share?
That's a really good question, and you're not going to like the answer. I'm going to use Hamilton as the example because I lived in Hamilton for 30 years. Hamilton has what's called a combined sewer system. Way back, like decades ago, when the sewage system was built, the people at that time thought, well, we should collect all the water, not just the water from our houses, but all of the rainwater and send it all to the sewage treatment plant.
Yeah.
That is a big problem when there's a big rainstorm because the sewage treatment plant gets overwhelmed and you could actually wash all of those good bugs out into the lake and then you would have to start all over again. So unfortunately, what we have to do is protect the treatment plant. We have to protect our bugs, our activated sludge. And the way we do that is by diverting some of the flow to big holding tanks. If any of you on the line are familiar with the city of Hamilton and you know Bayfront Park, the entire parking lot of Bayfront Park is on top of a holding tank. And so the rainwater sits in the holding tank until the storm is over. And then they pump it as they can to the treatment plant to be treated properly. But even sometimes, depending on the size of the storm, the holding tanks can't hold everything. And some of the wastewater has to be bypassed around the plant in order to protect the plant. So we do, unfortunately, discharge not completely treated wastewater during big storms.
Interesting. It'll be curious as sort of these big floods happen more and more frequently. Ontario, Quebec, I grew up in Toronto. If they are designed in that way to accommodate that so that we don't need to have that as a sort of like an unfortunate solution, so to speak. Very interesting question, guys. All right. More like straightforward one. We get this almost every broadcast we have. Is there a favorite part of your job? Something that gets you up in the morning that you just love to do every single day if you could?
Most of my job really excites me. I love going out to the treatment plants. I love seeing what the details of the machinery and the technology they're using. I love talking to the operators. You know, talk about a profession that gets no respect. Wastewater operators get no respect, and they absolutely should, because they care so much about their job and they work so hard to make sure that their treatment plants work the way they're supposed to and produce good quality water. And I also love the data that we generate from the science that we do and the reports that we write, and we give them to our colleagues, and they use them to make decisions about how to manage chemicals in Canada so that they don't get into our wastewater in the first place. So what is not to love?
Yep. And Shirley Anne, that is a fantastic place to near the end of our broadcast to wrap up in a second. I want to stress for kids that want to follow in your footsteps, who want to learn more about this, you highlighted the importance of keeping apprised of all these things. Is there anywhere you can send them? You highlighted the fantastic online resource from Hamilton. Yes?
Yes, absolutely. Yes? Own your throne.
Okay, yeah. Own your throne. Is there anything else you want to highlight for classes that might want to learn more about like this your whole division at Environment Canada? Any websites, any links that we can highlight for everybody?
In terms of our division, we don't have a website as such. What I would really encourage people to do is learn about the water where you live. So call your town or your city, talk to someone in the Public Works Department, and see if you can get a tour of your local drinking water plant and your local wastewater plant.
Outstanding. Shirley Anne, thank you so much for joining us today as part of our awesome Our Changing Planet series. Again, anyone who wants to tune in can catch our final broadcast with Emma Pasco tomorrow at 12. All of our 5 programs in the series are on our YouTube channel, so if you want to check that out, share this one with your friends and family. We obviously would love if you do just that. Shirley Anne, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll wrap up there. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and bye for now.
Thank